They took her badge first. Not ceremonially, not with explanation. A thin man from Human Resources waited outside the trauma wing at AH-6, holding a clipboard like a shield. He didn't meet her eyes when he asked for it, just said her name wrong, flattened it, softened it, then corrected himself without apology. The badge slid into his hand, warm from her body, and with it went 14 years of access, authority, and blood-earned trust. She stood there in navy scrubs, still damp at the cuffs from an arterial spray she'd scrubbed off less than an hour earlier. The patient had lived. He always forgot to say that part when he wrote her up. She noticed the man's hands were shaking. People always shook when they delivered bad news to her, like they sensed something in her they couldn't name. "You're being reassigned effective immediately," he said. "Facilities." She waited for the rest, the misunderstanding, the appeal to reason. None came. Facilities. She looked past him through the glass doors of the trauma bay. Controlled chaos. Residents moving too fast. Nurses moving just fast enough. The rhythm of it, the language of it, written into her bones. She had trained half the staff in that room. She had taught them how to keep their voices level while someone bled out under fluorescent light. Facilities. "I'm a trauma nurse," she said calmly. The man swallowed. Not today. They handed her a grey uniform in a basement office that smelled like bleach and old paper. Her name stitched in black thread over the chest pocket. Last name only, no title. She noticed the way the fabric hung heavier than scrubs, like it wanted to remind the body wearing it where it stood. She changed without ceremony, folded her scrubs with care, left them on the chair like a body after pronouncement. No one from administration came, no director, no chief medical officer, just a security escort who pretended not to recognize her, even though she had once stitched his femoral artery back together after a bar fight. The hospital woke up around her as she pushed the janitorial cart down the main corridor. Morning light bled in through narrow windows, catching dust motes and the polished floors. She felt invisible already. People stepped around her without seeing her face. Doctors talked over her. Nurses nodded politely, distant, as if proximity might be contagious. She had known this was coming. Not the timing, but the shape of it. You didn't survive the things she had survived without learning patterns. The quiet meetings behind glass, the unexplained audits, the way certain cases disappeared from the system after she touched them, the way her name stopped appearing on commendations. They never said it out loud, but the message had been consistent: stay in your lane. She had never been good at that. Facilities took her everywhere, every floor, every forgotten corridor, places she hadn't been allowed to access as clinical staff, sub-levels where the lights hummed too loudly and the walls felt thicker. She noticed cameras that weren't on any hospital map, doors with electronic locks far newer than the rest of the building, the kind of infrastructure that didn't belong in an underfunded VA hospital. She cleaned slowly, methodically, watching reflections in polished steel, listening. Her hands remembered things her mind tried to bury: the way to move without drawing attention, the way to catalog exits automatically, the way her shoulders stayed loose, ready. Reassignment didn't erase muscle memory. By mid-morning, word had spread. She caught fragments as she emptied bins and wiped rails. Something about an incident, liability risk. You know how she is. She knew how she was, too. She finished a stairwell on the east side and paused, one hand resting on the mop handle. For a moment, she closed her eyes, breathed. The building had a pulse. She felt it through the concrete, through the soles of her shoes. Hospitals always did. Most people mistook it for stress. She knew better. They hadn't reassigned her because she made a mistake. They had reassigned her because she hadn't, because she asked the wrong questions, because she recognized the wrong wounds, because she didn't look away when someone told her to. She opened her eyes. Facilities or not, she was still here, still inside the system, still watching. And whatever they thought they had buried by putting a mop in her hands, they were about to learn the same lesson others had learned before. She didn't forget, she didn't break, and she never stayed invisible for long. The sub-level hallways were never meant to be seen. They were built in the late 60s, when the hospital was still a federal psychiatric facility, long before the VA converted it, before the contractors came through and layered modern drywall over Cold War secrets. Down here, The lights flickered with a strange rhythm, and the air carried the metallic sting of old water pipes and long sealed silence. She moved without hurry, pushing her cart past empty surgical theaters and sealed freight elevators. The map they gave her at reassignment didn't show half these halls. That wasn't an oversight, it was a boundary, a message. But boundaries were just invitations to people like her. She followed her route, on paper, on the surface. In practice, she drifted off course, deliberately, always with a rag in her hand or a clipboard tucked under one arm like camouflage. She worked her way down into sub-level 3, where the linoleum gave way to concrete and every sound carried too far. This morning something was off. The air pressure shifted as she passed the west wing. A pressure seal had engaged behind one of the heavy fire doors. A quiet hiss, barely audible, but she heard it. Her ears were tuned for things like that. In trauma, you learn to read a room by the way people breathed. She could smell stress before someone collapsed, hear hesitation in the rhythm of an EKG. She paused by the door. A sign hung askew from rusted bolts. Archives, no badge scanner, just an old mechanical lock. But the dust on the hinges told a different story. It had been opened recently, often. She tried the handle, locked. She made a mental note. The janitorial key ring didn't cover this door, but someone came and went often enough to disturb the layered grime. There was a faint scent in the air, ozone and something else like hospital antiseptic, but not the brand the VA stocked. She logged that too. Further down, she found a loading area sealed off with fresh tape. No work orders listed, no scaffolding. Just plastic sheeting and a "Do Not Enter" sign in official stenciling that looked too clean to be from this hospital. Behind it, something buzzed. A low-frequency vibration, like active electronics or a power array. She stepped closer. The plastic pulsed with her breath. Someone had set up an isolation zone, but there were no HVAC units, no visible repairs, and, critically, no smell of paint. No plaster dust, no tools. She checked the floor. 2 parallel wheel tracks led into the space. Small, narrow, not a gurney, a cart, industrial. She knew that kind from experience. Tactical logistics. Move something heavy, fast, and don't leave fingerprints. She walked away, kept moving. Back upstairs, the noise returned, the surface world rhythm. Phones ringing, call lights blinking. Patients moaning behind curtains that never quite closed all the way. She passed a nurse she recognized, Monroe, 6 years in, good under pressure. Their eyes met for half a second, then Monroe looked down. Embarrassed, like she'd seen a ghost she used to admire. That night she returned. She timed the rounds of the other custodial staff, noting how often they doubled back. Most were contractors, underpaid, tired, eager to look the other way. It gave her space. She took the long way down, bypassed the west stairwell, too exposed, and used the old linen chute to descend to sub-level 3. Her boots hit the ground with a soft thud, the air colder now. A quiet hum greeted her. The plastic sheeting was gone. In its place, a locked steel door she hadn't seen before. Matte black, no handle. Just a scanner the color of blood. She didn't approach, not yet. Instead, she followed the corridor past the archives room and found a utility closet. The door was cracked. Inside, bleach, gloves, a backup generator humming too softly. And something else, a medical cart, top drawer half open. She crouched beside it and scanned the contents. Not VA issue. Sterile IV kits. Bio-seal trauma packs. Black morphine vials with no labels. One red tag. That tag stopped her cold, thin plastic. QR encoded. NATO standard. Not American. Not for civilians. She palmed it. No hesitation. Back in her quarters, an old on-call bunk room that someone forgot she had access to. She slid the red tag beneath her cot. Then she sat in the dark for a long time, listening to the distant echo of helicopters overhead, counting the seconds between passes. They hadn't grounded the airspace, but someone was flying patterns low and tight. Military. Recon. Not for her, but not for her either. Someone was moving something through this hospital, something that didn't want to be found. And someone else had buried her down here to make sure she wouldn't find it. They thought scrubbing toilets would keep her quiet. They forgot what she used to clean up before this. She lay back on the cot without removing her boots, eyes fixed on the ceiling. Somewhere above her, patients cried out in pain. Somewhere below her, a locked door waited for the right blood. And behind her ribs, an old instinct had started to whisper again, "Get ready." The blackout hit at 03:47. Not a flicker, not a surge. A total kill, clean and absolute. Lights off. Cameras blind. Ventilation silenced mid-cycle, leaving the air flat and mechanical. The generators should have kicked in within 5 seconds. They didn't. Down in sub-level 3, she froze mid-step, one gloved hand still gripping the handle of a biohazard bin. In the dark, her ears worked overtime. Somewhere in the distance, a soft metallic clang. A door. She waited. 1 heartbeat. 2. Then the emergency lights came on, but not where they were supposed to. A soft red glow lit the corridor around her. Too weak. Not hospital standard. These lights weren't wired into the facility's backup grid. They were tactical. She stepped back from the bin and slipped off her gloves. Every muscle in her body had gone tight. This wasn't a power failure. It was a test, or a cover. A hallway she'd cleaned every night for the past week was now bathed in crimson shadow. Her boots whispered against concrete as she moved toward the restricted door, the matte black one with the blood-colored scanner. It was open, not all the way. A 4-inch crack, just enough to feel deliberate. Inside, no light, no sound. She didn't go in. Not yet. Instead, she turned toward the archives door. Still locked, still dusty. Except for one thing, a set of bloody fingerprints smeared on the handle. Fresh, still tacky. She crouched, careful not to touch them. The print pattern was all wrong, low on the handle like someone had tried to pull themselves up from the floor. Someone injured. The lights flickered again, then stabilized. Down the hallway, a soft wheeze echoed, rhythmic and uneven, breathing. She followed the sound to the door of an old utility room she'd never seen open before. Inside, the smell hit first. Copper, sweat, antiseptic. Her flashlight carved through the dark. And there he was, mid-30s, male. Tan skin, stubble weeks old, combat boots caked in mud, laid out on the floor with a thermal blanket half pulled over his chest. IV line already in his arm, though no bag was attached. Blood soaked the left side of his abdomen. He looked up at her without fear. Recognition. "Took you long enough," he rasped, voice like torn leather. She knelt beside him without a word, hands already moving. No gloves, no time. "Who did this to you?" "Not who," he whispered. "What?" She applied pressure, scanning for entry wounds. There was a puncture high and right, angled down. Not a knife, not shrapnel. Something else. It hadn't exited. No bruising on the back. His pupils were blown unevenly. Internal bleeding. "I need a med kit," she said. "You're the med kit," he replied, a bitter edge to his smile. "That's why they buried you." She paused, stared at him. "I don't know you." "You do," he said. "But they took it from you." The emergency lights pulsed once, twice. Faint humming filled the air again. Systems rebooting. "Tell me your name." He laughed softly, coughed blood. "You'll remember when it counts." His eyes fluttered. She pinched his neck, sternal rub, pupils slow, pulse fading. She reached into her cart, pulled a saline flush and pressure gauze. Improvised stabilization. She worked in silence, fighting time, fighting memory. Her fingers moved like they used to in the field, without asking permission from the mind. He grabbed her wrist. "She's not dead," he said urgently. "You think she is, but she's not." "Who?" "You were there. Pulled her out. Lagos. Red smoke. Remember?" Her whole body went still. Lagos. A name she hadn't heard in 5 years. She hadn't told anyone. But he knew. He spoke it with certainty, not like a guess. Her throat went dry. "How do you know that?" "She told me," he said, his voice slipping. "Said to find you if it went bad." His pulse was crashing. She leaned in, placed her hand flat over his sternum, willing him to stay conscious. "Who are you?" But he was fading fast. His final breath was a word she hadn't heard since the end of her last deployment, a code phrase long decommissioned. Project Lantern. Then he went still. She stared down at his face. No ID, no dog tags. But his boots were regulation issue, custom sole pattern, used by special recon units only. The scar along his wrist, small, precise, with a notch at the edge, was a biometric chip incision. This man wasn't a patient, he wasn't even on the books. She scanned the room again. No surveillance, no vital monitors, just the faint hum of power coming back online. She stood slowly. When the lights fully returned, so did the cameras. The hallway outside was lit now, bright, sterile. She shut the door quietly behind her and continued her janitorial route like nothing had happened. 20 minutes later, when she returned with a trauma cart stolen from the main floor, the body was gone. No blood, no IV line, no trace, like he'd never been there at all. But she still had his blood on her hands, and in her mind, one phrase kept circling like a vulture over truth. Project Lantern. She didn't know what it meant, but she knew this. Someone had just activated her, and someone else was going to wish they hadn't. By morning, the corridors buzzed with the usual lies. Coffee carts rolled past triage. Nurses traded war stories from night shift like bullets in the dark. Quick, quiet, coded. The chief of medicine made his rounds, flanked by a resident with a clipboard and an ego too big for his lab coat. Everything looked normal, but she had worked enough trauma to know the signs of internal bleeding. This hospital was hemorrhaging secrets, and someone had decided she wouldn't be part of the cleanup crew anymore. She started her morning in the north wing, wiping down surfaces that had already been cleaned twice. Her hands moved automatically, but her mind stayed locked on the utility room, on the man who bled out in her lap, on the fact that he was gone. No body, no blood trail, no incident report. She'd combed the sub-level again at Aero 430, sweeping slow and methodically, checking every door. Everything had been sterilized, erased, but someone had missed something. Tucked beneath the radiator where the man had lain, she found a pressure bandage. Military grade, but one that hadn't been deployed. A sterile seal still intact. Civilian medics didn't carry this kind of gear. She slipped it into her pocket and kept moving. At 08:15, she climbed the east stairwell to administration. The air was different up here, too still. The kind of silence people confuse with professionalism, but is really just fear in a tailored suit. She walked past the double-glass doors toward records, where files still got hand-delivered when the network glitched, or security wanted to pretend something never happened. She knocked once, sharp, direct. The admin tech behind the desk looked up, startled. "Can I help you?" "I need the incident report from sub-level 3, between 0300 and 0500. Her voice was calm, not a request. The tech blinked. There's nothing logged for that window. We didn't have any activity flagged. No code blue, no code black, no staff reports?" He tapped nervously at the terminal, then stopped. Something on the screen froze him. "What?" she asked. There was a power loss recorded, but it was auto-flagged as a systems test. At 4 in the morning? Sometimes maintenance... Don't finish that sentence. She leaned forward just enough to make him feel it. She wasn't a janitor now, not in that moment. She was a woman who used to stop arterial bleeds in desert hospitals while mortars landed on the roof. She turned and left without another word. Next stop, Biomed. She'd trained the tech down there herself. Foster, smart, green, but loyal. She found him hunched over a calibration tool, earbuds in, jacket too clean for someone who claimed to be always swamped. "Foster," he startled, yanked the buds out. "Ma'am, hey, you, okay?" "I need your badge access logs for last night. All entries to sub-level 3 between 0200 and 0600. His smile dropped. I don't have clearance to pull that." "You monitor the door sensors. You see everything." "I do, but the servers, they're compartmentalized. Anything past sub-level 2 gets locked behind director-level access. I'd have to spoof the back end to even see who..." "Foster," he stopped talking. "You owe me." He hesitated, then slowly turned to his console and typed without looking at her. The terminal booted into a sandbox window, external shell only. a security bypass that would work once and leave a footprint he'd have to erase manually. She waited. After a moment, he whistled. There are 5 badge pings between 0312 and 0347. None of them have names. What? They're listed as Logistics Zulu. No ID. No corresponding time in records. It's like they showed up, got waved through, and disappeared. Civilians. He shook his head. No civilian gets a Zulu clearance. That's black-level DOD stuff. Think special operations, contractors, private military. He looked at her now, really looked. What's going on down there? Nothing, she lied. Just curious. She left him rattled and walked straight to the elevator banks, bypassing her janitorial route entirely. She needed to see the director. Now. But the moment she stepped into the executive wing, 2 security personnel flanked her. "Ma'am," the taller one said, firm but polite, "you're not cleared to be here. I need to speak to Director Amaral. She's unavailable." "I'm not asking." He didn't move. She looked at him, tall, broad-shouldered, marine build under a too-tight blazer. His boots were spit-shined, his stance was regulation, but his name tag was off-center, sloppy, not a real security officer. "You ex-military?" she asked. No comment. "You're not VA security?" "No, ma'am." "Then who the hell are you?" "We're contractors." "Out of whose budget?" "Director Amaral's." The second man spoke for the first time. "We were instructed to inform you that any further access attempts will result in termination of contract." She looked at both of them. "Which contract? The janitor one, or the one they wiped from my file 2 years ago?" Neither answered. She turned and walked out without another word. But inside, her mind was cutting through the noise like a scalpel. They knew who she was. They knew what she used to do. And they were scared enough to lock down every corridor she'd touched since the blackout. They thought she'd go quiet, that she'd take the erasure and fade into the noise. But this wasn't noise, this was pre-op calm, the breath before the incision. By nightfall, she was back in her old bunk, disassembling the pressure bandage she'd hidden earlier. It wasn't standard issue after all. Inside the sealed casing, she found a folded strip of carbon polymer and a single coded microdot, encrypted data, no larger than a fingernail. She slid it beneath the lining of her boot, then she sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the wall until the lights clicked off at 2300. Silence thickened around her again, administrative, clinical, tactical. Every kind of silence had a texture. This one tasted like fear in a lab coat and surveillance behind a one-way mirror. Someone upstairs was sweating, because someone downstairs had started to remember who she used to be. And soon, so would she. It started with the vibrations in the glass. Not the kind you feel from traffic or passing elevators, but deep rhythmic pulses, low frequency, almost imperceptible. They rattled the water in bedside cups, shivered across blood sample trays. On the ICU's 5th floor, someone said it was just construction. A new trauma wing, maybe. But the concrete didn't shake like this for steel and cranes. She was in the west wing when the first shadow passed. It slid across the floor-to-ceiling window like a ghost, fast, low, tight, and vanished before anyone else looked up. She paused mid-sweep, hand still gripping the mop. She knew that silhouette, sleek, narrow, designed for fast insertions and urban warfare. AH-6 Little Bird. The kind that doesn't fly unless the mission is dirty, urgent, and off-book. 2 minutes later, another shadow joined it. Then a third. 3 birds, staggered formation, hovering low above the VA hospital like they were watching it breathe. She abandoned the cart. Her boots echoed through the stairwell as she climbed toward the roof access hatch, bypassing floors like she had rank again. Her badge couldn't open the final security door, but the key she'd lifted from Foster's locker last night could. The hatch opened with a groan. Cold morning air slammed into her face. They were already descending. 3 AH-6 little birds, matte black, 0 insignia. Each bird hovered with surgical precision above the courtyard below, rotors slicing the air with an unnatural hum. They landed in a staggered line, not on the helipad, but on the lawn near the east entrance, an unmarked landing zone. That was deliberate. This wasn't a medevac. She dropped flat to the roof, eyes locked on the scene below. 10 operators disembarked in full kit, No unit patches, high-speed body armor, suppressed carbines with thermoptic scopes. Every move they made was tight, efficient, trained. She'd seen Delta work before. This wasn't Delta, this was something colder. They moved like ghosts trained by men who never filled out retirement paperwork. One of them tapped his helmet. Seconds later, the hospital's power hiccuped. Again. She felt it in her ribs. The same artificial blackout from sub-level 3. Only this time it cascaded upward. The entire grid went dark for exactly 22 seconds. Backup systems whirred on, then flickered out again. Intentional failure. The elevators stopped, the cameras froze, the building exhaled, and then held its breath. From her rooftop vantage, she watched the team breach the east entrance. No noise, no commotion, just surgical entry like they'd been here before. Because they had. She backed away from the hatch, slid down the stairwell in silence. Boots never touching the center of the steps. Her body remembered how to do this. Not hospital protocol, infill protocol. She passed confused staff on the 4th floor, 2 doctors, 3 nurses, fumbling through the blackout, their phones flickering with no signal. Someone was jamming comms. She hit the sub-level again within 4 minutes. The black door with the blood-red scanner was open now. No alarms. Inside, the space had changed, cleaned, sterilized. But now it smelled like war, burned plastic, ozone, and the faintest trace of cordite. She moved quickly, silently, following fresh boot prints across the concrete. They stopped at a recessed hatch she hadn't noticed before. It was flush with the wall, no handle, no label, but it had been opened recently. The paint was still scuffed, and the air beyond it was colder than the rest of the floor. From deep inside she heard muffled voices, not English. She leaned in. Language, Serbian, maybe Bosnian, a dialect she hadn't heard in over a decade, not since Sarajevo. The words were clipped, technical. One phrase caught her ear. "She's awake." A sharp metallic sound. Then footsteps, multiple, moving toward the hatch. She backed off fast, slipped behind a column as 3 of the operators emerged. One of them dragged a gurney. On it, covered in thermal blankets and strapped with tactical restraints, was a woman. Pale, unconscious, but not dead. Her arm hung limply from the side, revealing a black tattoo burned into the underside of her wrist. Lanterns 07. The woman from Lagos. The one they said had died. The one he had spoken about, right before he bled out in her arms. They had her, alive. And she was the reason the little birds were here. The gurney vanished down the hall, deeper into the hospital, not toward an OR, not toward the morgue, toward the old psych ward, sealed off after a fire 7 years ago. No power, no official usage. But its layout, perfect for isolation. She followed at a distance. Doors were being locked behind the operators. Electronic seals she couldn't override. Not without a badge she hadn't touched in years. She needed to get upstairs, needed to get ahead of them. But first, she ducked into an old maintenance locker. Inside, she retrieved a backpack she'd stashed days ago, just in case. Inside, trauma shears, backup phone with Faraday sleeve, a suppressed M9 from her last life, and a laminated card with 4 words printed in coded red ink. Lantern 07, protocol active. She stared at it for a long moment, then shoved it into her pocket. Upstairs, the hospital was waking up again. Lights on, power restored, monitors beeping, nurses moving fast now, tension in their eyes. But something was different. Patients were being rerouted. A full wing of the ICU had been quietly emptied, and the director, gone. No one had seen her since the birds landed. She made her way to the old surgical ward, where an unused OR still held its original lead-lined walls, built for containment. Not surgery. She found them there. The woman from the gurney now awake. Her eyes tracked movement like an animal. She was strapped to a chair, electrodes wired to her scalp. One operator spoke softly in her ear, and the director, standing in the corner, silent, watching, not in charge, owned. She didn't break cover, not yet. Instead, she counted heads, 10 operators, 1 target, 2 civilians compromised, 3 AH-6s waiting for exfil, and only one person in the entire building still off books. Her, the black nurse they reassigned to janitorial duty. But now the little birds had landed, and she was no longer cleaning floors. She was planning a rescue. She didn't sleep, didn't blink for 3 hours. She sat in a vent shaft above the decommissioned OR, legs folded, pulse low, eyes fixed through a mesh grate at the woman below. Lantern 07, strapped to a steel restraint chair, flanked by 3 operators and the director of the hospital, who no longer looked like someone in charge, but rather someone waiting for permission to breathe. The woman, Lantern, was awake now, barely. Eyelids heavy, skin pale, electrodes running from her temples to a console behind her, pulsing faint green lights in slow, methodical intervals. Controlled sedation, stimulant resistance protocol, not VA gear. This was DARPA-grade interrogation. They weren't trying to get information from her, they were trying to extract memory, and she'd seen this before, once, years ago, in a sand-blasted NATO forward operating base outside Mosul, a patient brought in under blackout orders. Same setup, same hardware. It ended with 6 dead, a drone strike on their coordinates, and a casualty list that still didn't have names. The program behind it was Lantern, a last-ditch initiative for field trauma recovery, memory reconstruction, and intelligence extraction using enhanced neurostimulation. The nurse, now janitor, had treated one of the techs who built it. She remembered his eyes before he bled out, empty, like the machine had taken more than it gave. She shifted slightly in the vent shaft, just enough to feel her M9 press against her ribcage. She had 4 rounds left, subsonic, close range only. But she didn't need bullets. She needed timing. Below, the lead operator, bearded, late 40s, center mass bulk, leaned toward Lantern's ear and whispered something. She didn't react. Then he said her name. Out loud. Not Lantern's name. Her name. Staff Sergeant Amari Royce. She froze. He said it with surgical clarity, a tone that wasn't recognition. It was possession. She's watching, he continued. We let her live. Figured you'd want her to see this. Lantern flinched, then turned her head, just enough for her eyes to track up, to the vent, to Royce. They locked eyes, and for the first time in 5 years, Amari Royce remembered who the hell she was. 4 hours later, the hospital was quiet. Visiting hours ended. Staff sent home early due to infrastructure assessments. Only skeleton crew remained, shift nurses, a few orderlies, and the operators who weren't even pretending to hide now. Amari moved like a shadow through the sublevels. The janitor's uniform, once meant to erase her, now served as perfect cover. No one looked twice. She accessed Foster's console again. It was wiped. She checked the trauma wing's patient logs. Tampered. She pinged Monroe through an old encrypted chat app they used during a ransomware lockdown last year. Royce, you trust me? Monroe, I used to. Royce, I need a blood bag, 2 syringes, and 5 minutes of distraction at 0200. Monroe, who's bleeding? Royce, if I do this right, no one. Monroe, that's the worst lie you've ever told. Royce, still in? Monroe, always. At 0145, she accessed a forgotten maintenance shaft that linked the North Surgical Wing to the old psych ward. She used to hide in this corridor during 36-hour shifts, back when she still wore a badge. Back when her hands saved lives on record instead of off it. The route bypassed all cameras. She arrived outside the reinforced OR. The room was dark now. Lantern was alone, strapped still, monitored still, but alone. She checked the corridor. Clear. She entered without hesitation. Lantern didn't startle, just looked at her with recognition that ran deeper than memory, like muscle remembering a weight it hadn't lifted in years. Amari unstrapped her slowly, watching her vitals on the monitor spike and then level. You remember me, Amari whispered. Lantern's voice was sandpaper. I remembered you first. You died. They said I did. What did they do to you? Same thing they did to you. Amari paused. The weight of it hit her in the chest. Not emotion, tactic. You were Lantern 07, she said. What am I? Lantern met her eyes. Lantern AH-6. A chill rippled through her. The phrase, the protocol, the silence. It had all been the same playbook. "I didn't consent," Amari said. Lantern half smiled. "You did once. We both did. They just never told us when it would start." Footsteps echoed outside the corridor. Amari moved fast. She handed Lantern a syringe. "Adrenaline. You're going to need to run." Lantern took it without blinking. Outside, Monroe's voice rose, sharp, frantic. "Sir, I need help here. Code White, ICU, I've got a patient down." A chair scraped. Boots rushed past. Amari opened the second exit, pulled Lantern through, locked it behind them. They moved through the dark like they'd trained for this 100 times. Halfway to the sub-level stairwell, Amari paused. "Why now?" she asked. "Why bring the birds? Why expose all this?" Lantern looked at her, calm, steady. "Because the files are live." "What files?" "The ones we died to protect." Amari felt it then, deep in her pocket. The microdot, encrypted. And now she knew why she'd been reassigned, why her name had vanished from the VA database, why every blood trail led back to her own hands. She wasn't just a risk, she was the failsafe. And they had buried her deep enough to forget. But now, she was back above ground, with a target and a witness, and the kind of silence that only happens before a building burns down, the kind that comes right before a reckoning. Rain hit the pavement like suppressed gunfire. Midnight hadn't fallen gently. It had crashed in with a cold front and a blackout warning. Somewhere above the city, the little birds circled once more before vanishing into cloud cover. No lights, no beacon, no trace. Inside the hospital, Amari Royce moved through the dark with clinical precision. No longer a nurse, no longer a janitor, now a ghost with purpose. Lantern, barely walking, adrenaline burning off, staggered beside her down a long-forgotten access tunnel beneath sub-level 2. A service corridor built during the Cold War, lined with crumbling insulation and obsolete electrical panels. Amari had cleaned this hallway for weeks, cataloguing its entrances, exits, blind spots. This was the long game. This was the perimeter recon she'd done with bleach and gloves, while pretending to be invisible. Now? She was about to make noise. At the far end of the tunnel, behind a locked steel maintenance hatch, sat a box the VA administration didn't know she still had access to. Foster had shown her how to reboot it from a diagnostics panel, a piece of legacy infrastructure from when the hospital had hosted a joint DTRA-DOD research wing in the early 2000s, supposedly mothballed, but the system still pinged every Thursday at 0300. She popped the hatch. Inside, a terminal, dust-covered, active. She inserted the microdot. The screen flickered. Then green text filled the display. Project Lantern, failover protocol engaged. Authorization. Lantern AH-6 user ID. Royce, AS, rank, staff, SGT, retired classified. She stared at the line for a long moment, then reached into her pocket and pulled out an old ID card. Not VA issued. Laminated, fingerprint activated, worn to near anonymity. She pressed it to the terminal. It blinked, then beeped. Decrypting. She heard Lantern's breath catch behind her. "What is this?" the woman whispered. Amari didn't answer. She read the screen. Dozens of file names. Redacted mission logs, gene therapy trials, failed prototypes, deployment schedules, even sealed orders marked with names she thought were long buried under burned ops in Mali, Karachi, Damascus. At the bottom of the list, Phoenix Nest location, Site 12, VA Regional Node, Baltimore. Containment, status, compromised field agents, activated. She clicked. A schematic opened. The hospital, every level, every blind corridor, every restricted access door she'd been reassigned to clean. It wasn't a hospital, it was a vault, a hub, a federal black site disguised in plain sight. Lantern agents weren't just test subjects, they were redundancies, weapons, buried in civilian infrastructure, activated only when national command structures failed. They'd buried her to plug a leak. Now she was that leak. Lantern spoke beside her. "They don't know you activated the system." No, Amari replied. Not yet. You sure? She paused, then tapped a subdirectory. Administrative access. Hospital director. Amaral I. A video feed flickered to life. Director Amaral stood in her office, pacing, hands trembling as she spoke into an untraceable sat phone. We've lost AH-7, yes, and AH-6 is active. Pause. No, we didn't kill her. We buried her. There's a difference. She stopped walking. Her voice dropped. We can't contain both. You'll have to burn the node. Amari shut the screen off. Her jaw tensed. Time to move. They left the sub-level corridor fast, back up to the abandoned West Wing, where the hospital's original data center still sat behind reinforced doors. She'd memorized the route. No cameras. No foot traffic. All the security had shifted around the OR and the East ICU, where the operators were busy running drills that weren't drills. She used the keycard. The door opened with a slow hiss. Inside, darkness. Banks of old servers, one emergency light buzzing overhead. Lantern leaned against the wall, chest heaving. Amari moved to the console. She connected the microdot again, pulled the last file. A personnel log. Lantern agents embedded in federal systems, nurses, orderlies, medics. Some retired, some forgotten. All modified. All tagged for failover command. Lantern 01, status unknown. Lantern 02, status KIA. Lantern 03, status KIA. Lantern 04, status active, CIA custody. Lantern 05, status KIA, confirmed Lagos. Lantern 06, status unknown, reassigned Lantern 07. Status recovered. Amari stared at the word, reassigned. She remembered it like a bruise, the HR clipboard, the mop, the look in the security guard's eyes when he escorted her off the trauma floor. She hadn't been demoted, she'd been neutralized. Not a person, a weapon without a mission, and now she had one. Lantern sat down, her knees finally giving out. They're going to kill everyone in this building, and she said, to erase us, erase this. I know. Amari unplugged the drive, inserted it into a hardened transmitter stashed in the back of the server bay. No GPS, no ping, just a dead-drop relay that would bounce the data across old military nodes until it hit one of 3 unmonitored receivers. I'm going to expose the whole program, she said. Lantern looked at her. They'll burn you down to bone. Then they should have buried me deeper. She activated the transmission. The server lit up like a blood vessel. Half a second later, she heard the rotor blades return, louder this time, not circling, descending. The little birds were back. She checked her watch. 03. Zo, dead on. The system ping, their fail-safe protocol. The one that would wipe the node, erase all data, everyone inside expendable. Lantern grabbed her arm. They're going to level the building. Not if I finish first. Finish what? Amari looked at her. Her eyes were cold steel now. I'm going to give them something they can't erase. She handed Lantern a burner phone and a location. Leave now. Go underground. There's still another node in DC. You'll know what to do when you get there. Lantern shook her head. You're not coming. I started this. Then, softly, I'm ending it. Outside, the first explosion tore through the East Wing. Fire alarms howled. Operators barked orders. The birds were landing, and the janitor, Lantern 6, stepped out of the shadows with her M9 drawn, a keycard in one hand, and every secret they tried to erase hardwired into her bones. They should have never activated her. They should have let her stay buried. Fluorescent lights stuttered. Fire alarms screamed. Acrid smoke crawled through the vents, dragging with it the stench of burning insulation and synthetic materials. Somewhere above the ICU, ceiling panels buckled from the force of the second explosion. Controlled. Precise. Surgical. This wasn't a panic. This was a cleansing. Amari Royce stepped through the chaos with purpose, boots crunching on shattered glass, her grip steady on the M9. She moved like she had in Fallujah, like she had in Lagos, like she had every time someone told her the mission was over, and she kept moving anyway. Her janitor's uniform was charred at the sleeve and slick with smoke. But the blood on her forearm was fresh. Not hers. Not yet. She'd spent the last 4 minutes in the pediatric wing, now converted to a temporary trauma unit, where 3 nurses had taken shrapnel from the East Wing blast. She patched them with one hand and reloaded with the other, clearing debris just long enough to stabilize a collapsed lung with a plastic catheter and duct tape. No one asked how she knew what to do. They just let her work. Now she was moving toward Ward K, the oldest part of the hospital. No cameras, no alarms, just manual locks and lead-lined doors. It had been shut for asbestos. The truth, it was one of 3 last-ditch shelters for executive staff in the event of an attack. And it was where the director was hiding. She heard gunfire 2 corridors over. Short bursts, close quarters. Suppressed, the kind that didn't echo. The kind that meant rooms were being cleared, one by one. Sweep and burn. They weren't just trying to kill Lantern assets. They were scrubbing everyone who'd seen them. Patients, orderlies, admin staff. The entire overnight ER roster had been replaced by shadows in tactical gear. Amari knew the rhythm. Fire, confirm, silence. No wounded, no witnesses. She reached the corridor junction outside Ward K. Stopped. 3 bodies on the floor. 2 nurses. 1 security officer. Single shots to the head. Executed. Not caught in the blast. Put down. Her jaw locked. She slipped the badge off the guard's shirt, swiped it at the entry panel. The light turned green. The door groaned open. Inside, low lights flickered over a makeshift command hub, folding tables, laptops, mobile routers. Director Amaral stood near the far wall, arms folded, flanked by 2 operators. She looked like she hadn't slept in days. The moment she saw Amari, her face fell, not in fear but resignation. "I told them this would happen," Amaral said quietly. "You didn't try very hard to stop it." "No," Amaral admitted. "I didn't." The 2 operators raised weapons. Amari moved first. 3 shots, controlled, center mass. The first went down with a surprised grunt. The second got off a wild round that tore into the floor. The third never came. Amari was already on top of him, driving a trauma shear through his throat before his finger found the trigger. Silence. She turned to Amaral. "Where's the failsafe?" Amaral blinked. "You don't know? If I knew, I'd already be gone." The director exhaled, then walked slowly to the terminal. She tapped 3 keys, typed a string of numbers. A new screen opened. Node 12 destruct sequence T-minus 29 minutes. Primary. Detonator. West sublevel generator core. Secondary. Reactor containment override off-site trigger. Amari read it. Jaw clenched. "Who has the secondary?" "Langley." "Who issued the order?" "The same people who built you." She stepped forward. "You mean us?" Amaral didn't flinch. "No. You were an accident. Lantern was never meant to last." Amari leveled the pistol at her. "You buried me alive." "No," Amaral said. "I spared you. I knew what you were, what they made you. I saw what happened to Lantern 03 when they activated him too early. I knew if they turned you loose without control, then you should have killed me. I couldn't, and now it's too late." Amari lowered the pistol, then raised her radio, patched to a stolen channel Monroe gave her, piggybacked on hospital emergency frequencies. She keyed the mic. "Attention to all surviving hospital staff. This is Staff Sergeant Amari Royce. If you're hearing this, evacuate now. Leave your posts. Ignore all orders from private contractors. A burn protocol is in progress. This building will not survive the hour. Get out. Now." She clipped the radio back on. Amaral laughed bitterly. "You think they'll listen to you? They don't need to. They just need 10 seconds of doubt." "And then what?" Amari looked at her. Something cold settled behind her eyes. "Then I get in the way." The next 30 minutes were war. Amari led a rolling triage through the second floor, holding pressure on an arterial bleed while guiding a gurney with her shoulder, screaming orders at anyone still breathing. Monroe held the elevators open with a fire axe, while 10 patients were crammed into a freight lift meant for 4. A pharmacy tech smashed open the crash cart for supplies no one had signed off on, and above them, through the broken skylights, the little birds came back. But they didn't land. They hovered, waiting. Not for extraction, for confirmation. If the node couldn't be secured, it would be destroyed. If Lantern 06 wasn't neutralized, she would be erased. Amari knew the math. She counted heads, still at least 25 inside. Patients, staff, survivors. The fail-safe countdown was past the halfway point. The primary detonation charge was in the generator room. She turned to Monroe. "Can you get them out?" Monroe nodded, blood down her neck. "I can get them to the west lot." "Good. And you?" Amari checked her weapon. 2 rounds left. "I'm going to reset the math." She made it to the generator core with 3 minutes on the clock. Wired explosives blinked at regular intervals. She stared at them. No det cord. No manual override. Just a biometric pad. Authorization. Lantern. Designate. Only. She placed her hand on the pad. It accepted her. Override code? She typed, "Lantern 06, protocol rescind." The lights flickered. Then, failsafe paused. Authorization pending. Her mouth went dry. Somewhere, someone still had the kill switch, and they hadn't pressed it yet. She stepped back, heart pounding. The people she'd saved were still running, still escaping, but she was now the decision point. If Langley hit confirm, she wouldn't feel a thing. But for now she waited, inside a burning node, with blood on her hands and lives behind her. Triage wasn't over. It had just changed forms. Smoke painted the hallways in shades of war. Alarms screamed across every corridor, drowning out the world like a held breath before the final rupture. The hospital, once sterile and overlit, was now a flickering mausoleum, walls shivering under the weight of a countdown no one could see but her. Every second the failsafe remained paused was a second carved from someone's hesitation, and Amari Royce was betting her life that somewhere, someone at a desk had started to doubt the math. She didn't wait for mercy. She made her way back up the north stairwell, 2 at a time, boots hitting the grates like war drums. Her legs burned, her lungs stung, but she moved through it. She always had. That was the difference between survival and victory. Pain was just part of the terrain. By the time she reached the admin floor, the fires had started to bloom. Controlled thermals, set by the cleanup teams. Every desk in the HR wing was burning. Every record, every form, every disciplinary warning they'd buried her under, turned to ash. But the server core, still intact. She kicked the door open and found him there. Carver, federal liaison, civilian suit, but his posture screamed military. A handler, the kind they send when something classified grows teeth. He stood in front of the last terminal. Calm, too calm. "I wondered how long it'd take you to find me," he said without turning. "You're the one holding the trigger." He nodded, still deciding whether to pull it. She raised her pistol. "Then let me help." He didn't flinch. "You shoot me, and the trigger gets passed. You think we only wired one handler?" "Doesn't matter. The survivors are already out." "Yes," he said, slowly turning to face her. "But that's not the point, is it?" Amari felt it then. That weight, the logic of their math. The node wasn't just a facility, it was a test bed, a keystone. Lantern wasn't about survival, it was about thresholds. How much could be erased? How much could be weaponized? How far a soldier could break and still keep standing? "You left me in that hospital to rot." "No," Carver said. "We put you there to wait." "For what?" "For this moment." Amari stared, and slowly, too slowly, understood. "You used the others to draw me out." Lantern 07 was the bait. The others were noise. You're the proof of concept. She took a step forward, pistol trembling now, not from fear, from fury barely restrained. "I saved lives tonight. You disobeyed protocol. I exposed your burn order. You compromised national assets. They were people, goddammit." He sighed almost sadly. "That's the thing with your kind. You confuse empathy for clarity. You want a war with rules. You think survival is noble. But survival is just math, Royce. And right now you're the variable we didn't account for." She stared at him. The gun was still up, but her hands felt distant. "Then pull the trigger. Burn your node. Make me another redacted file." He stepped closer. "You know I can't." She cocked her head. "Why?" "Because you're the only lantern left who isn't broken." Silence ballooned between them. Then he said carefully, "You walk away now, we bury this. You live a quiet life, we never activate you again." "And if I don't?" Carver's mouth tightened. "Then you'll bring the whole network down, and you'll live just long enough to wish you hadn't." She holstered the pistol, then walked to the terminal behind him. The system was still live, the failsafe still blinking. Paused. She keyed in a command. "Transmit full logs, route, civilian node, secured the channels." Carver's voice hardened. "You do that, you break protocol. I was never yours to program." The cursor blinked. She hit enter. The logs began to flood. Mission files, kill orders, body counts, deletion memos, every buried op, every patient erased from records, every lantern who died with a fake discharge status. Flooding, out, everywhere. Carver stepped back, staggered. "You don't understand what you've done." "I do," she said. "I gave them names again." He lunged. She was faster. A single elbow to his throat, non-lethal. Enough to drop him. Enough to make sure he remembered who put him on the ground. Then she walked out of the fire. By the time she reached the west exit, the VA node was collapsing in on itself. Not structurally, politically. Sirens blared in the distance. Not emergency responders. Federal extraction. She stepped into the smoke-thick morning air. Staff were scattered across the parking lot. Nurses coughing. Patients wrapped in blankets. Monroe crouched beside a trauma patient, triaging with one gloved hand and holding a phone to her ear with the other. The world was blurry from heat distortion, but people were alive, that mattered. Amari didn't wait for a round of applause. There wasn't one coming, just silence and distant rotors. She found an abandoned VA SUV, tossed her pack into the front seat, and slid behind the wheel. The engine turned once, twice, then caught. Lantern 07 had gone dark, gone underground. Safe, for now. She had data. Amari had proof. The world just hadn't caught up yet. As the SUV pulled out of the lot, she caught sight of her reflection in the side mirror. No uniform, no badge, no chain of command, just a scarred face and smoke-filled eyes. The cost of survival wasn't blood or guilt. It was remembering what they'd turned her into and choosing not to become it. She drove toward the sunrise. One last mission left. Burn the program, bury the architects. Make sure no one ever built another lantern again. She drove until the sky broke open. Grey dawn clawed across the interstate as the VA facility disappeared behind her in the rear view. Just smoke and blinking barricades now. The feds would come. The cleanup would follow. Reports would be written, redacted, sealed. They'd call it an equipment failure or sabotage, a domestic incident, some name that could float without meaning, but the files were already out. By the time Amari Royce hit the county line, 5 military-adjacent whistleblower groups had full access to Lantern protocols. 3 journalists had called her burner phone. One of them had asked the question that told her the leaks had stuck. What's Project Phoenix Nest? They knew just enough to be scared. Good. She ditched the SUV an hour outside D.C., burned the plates, dumped the phone. No GPS, no paper trail. Then she walked 3 miles through woods, slick with frost and silence, until she reached an unmarked cottage that wasn't on any property record. The man inside opened the door before she knocked. He didn't say anything, just nodded, motioned her in. An old contact from her black site medevac days, back when she pulled intel out of bloodstreams and memory out of fractured brains, back when she was still useful to people in rooms without windows. He handed her a drive. She handed him the copy of the Lantern logs. Full dump, no backdoors. "If I don't make it through the next week," and she said, "this goes live everywhere." He nodded. "Who do I send it to?" Her eyes didn't flinch. "Everyone. No aliases now, no compartmentalization, no shadows. This wasn't a surgical strike anymore. This was war by light." 2 days later, she walked into a federal building with no appointment. She passed through 6 checkpoints, was flagged by facial recognition at 3, and by the time she reached the inner lobby, 4-man security detail surrounded her like they were escorting a live grenade. "Name?" one asked. "Staff Sergeant Amari Royce." "You're not listed. I'm not asking for an invite." They took her upstairs, no cuffs. But the pressure in the room changed. They handed her off to someone in a suit too clean for real work. Eyes like glass, military accent, intelligence vocabulary. Someone who read files for a living and forgot the blood between the lines. "You're the one who sent the files," he said. "I'm the one who survived them." He paused, then leaned in. "You understand you've exposed active operations, endangered lives, violated a dozen federal codes." She stared back, unimpressed. "Lantern wasn't an operation. It was a cover story." He hesitated. "You're not authorized to make that distinction." "I am now." "Who authorized you?" She reached into her coat, pulled a folded letter, marked with a single red stamp. "Reinstatement. Temporary. Active field status." Signatory: Brig. General Tamsin Wolfe, retired, DoD CIA liaison. The man read it twice, then again. His throat clicked when he swallowed. "She's not in command anymore." Amari's voice was quiet. Too quiet. She never stopped being accountable. "You're trying to open a case that doesn't exist." "I'm not trying." She leaned forward. "I already did." She spent the next 48 hours in a secure government suite. Blank walls, recycled air, no windows. Debrief after debrief, blood tests, psych evals. A physical run by someone pretending not to see the old scar beneath her ribs. A mark from her lantern induction surgery. The kind that wasn't in her medical file. They checked her reflexes. She passed. They checked her memory. She passed. They asked if she was stable. She didn't answer. Finally, they brought in someone real. General Wolfe. She entered the room like the war never ended. Silver hair, combat boots, civilian clothes worn like armor. Amari hadn't seen her since Africa, since Lagos, since they buried the last lantern in a crater and left Amari to fade out in a VA with a mop and a silence order. Wolfe sat across from her. No greeting. "You're not dead." "Disappointed?" Wolfe smirked. "No, but I thought you might be." Amari said nothing. "You burned the node," Wolfe continued. "You exposed the program. You overrode a kill order signed by a sitting deputy director." Amari shrugged. "Your point?" Wolfe leaned in. "My point is, what do you want now? Not what are you here for, not what comes next. What do you want?" Amari answered without hesitation. "I want them all." Wolfe didn't blink. "You'll be alone. I've been alone since they strapped me to a gurney and made me forget my name. You want justice? I want an end." Wolfe slid a folder across the table. Inside, photos, names, locations. Every architect of Lantern still walking free. Every handler, medic, and executive who'd signed off on turning people into assets and memory into weaponry. Amari flipped through it. At the end, a single sheet. Operation designation, final light objective, full dissolution of Lantern Remnants Field. Lead, Staffs GT Amari Royce. Reinstated provisional clearance. No applause, no ceremony, just a signature line. She signed. Wolfe stood. "One more thing," she said. She dropped something on the table. A badge, new, fresh. Amari Royce, trauma nurse and field medic, Tactical Liaison VA insignia, black stripe through the bottom, official again. Amari picked it up, weighed it in her palm, heavy with everything it had cost. "You're sending me back into the fire." "No," Wolfe said. "You're walking in with the match." Later, Amari stood in front of a bathroom mirror in a safe house 5 blocks from Capitol Hill. She wore the new uniform, not a janitor, not a ghost, just a soldier with memory, a nurse with blood in her hands. She ran one fingertip along her reflection's jawline. The scar was still there, but so was the fire in her eyes. This was reinstatement, not into a system, but into herself. She walked out of the room. The hunt had begun.